So this is Athens for Everyone's Q&A with Andrew Ferguson, who is running for Congress in Georgia's 10th district. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you, Erin and Athens for Everyone for having me. Having done quite a few of these, I know just what a production it is to have all these candidates on. So thank you. It's a tremendous service to the community. It's a tremendous service to us candidates.
I'm glad you could be here. Do you want to start out by introducing yourself and talking a little bit about who you are, how you came to be in this surreal position of running for office
during a pandemic?
Right.
Yeah. Who would have thought? I'm originally from Duluth, Georgia, which is about 50 minutes outside of Athens. It's in Gwinnett County. I grew up, my mom got divorced from my father when I was 6 months old. And she was a single mother to a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old, trying to raise us on a first grade teacher's salary. And if you think teachers don't get paid much now, they really did not get paid much back in 1979, Duluth, Georgia. So that was a very enriching experience for me growing up. We did not go anywhere without a coupon. Whether it was Miss Winters or Winn-Dixie, we very much lived right on the border of poverty. And so I know what it's like to live through such lean times, and it's kind of a parallel to what we may be experiencing now for a lot of folks. Again, very lean times, and we don't know what this crisis is going to bring going forward. So anyway, grew up in Duluth, went to the University of Georgia, graduated from the Terry College of Business, and then we'll do a zag for a moment, became a golf professional, much to my mother's chagrin.
What?
Yes. So I was a golf professional for 5 years here at the University of Georgia Golf Course. So I also worked for the University of Georgia. I then decided there was really not much fulfillment in helping someone hit a better 3-iron or hit a better putt or a better driver. So I went back to graduate school at the University of Georgia. I was fortunate enough to get accepted to the School of Public and International Affairs. And so I graduated from there with a master's degree in public administration with a specialization in local government. I don't know how long this segment usually lasts for people, but I was all set to take a job outside of Savannah as the finance director for the city of Garden City. I went down, interviewed, was offered the job, said, could I have one night to sleep on it? Because I had never moved, 4 hours away from my family. And that was a big deal to me. I'm very close with my family. And so driving back, I got a phone call from my mother. And again, my parents are divorced. My father has since passed away. And it was from my mother saying, you need to talk to your sister. Something's happened with your father and her today. And long story short, our family had a family business that had 12 to 14 convenience stores. My late father was a Texaco jobber, which meant he ran convenience stores all across the metro Atlanta area, including here in Athens, the Shell station that is now at the end of 316, where the Lowe's and Home Depot and Kroger all kind of dead end. We used to own that. And so my father had, unbeknownst to my sister and I, had run that business into the ground, in part because he was a bipolar manic depressive. And that was a tremendous wake-up call to me, because I had known that he had suffered from mental illness, and obviously I'd even driven him on some occasions to his therapist and gotten his medications. But I never knew exactly the full severity until we got into this crisis. And so again, long story short, it turned out we needed to check him into Charter Peachford to get help. And so my sister and I took over our family business. And this coincidentally was during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And so one of the things I feel like I'm uniquely qualified for is navigating a tremendous financial crisis, because I've already done it once. We did it with our family. I did it with my sister. We had to sell off our father's business. We had to sell off our father's home. He basically, once he got out of Charter Peachford, had a 1-bedroom apartment, didn't even have access to a car. That's where we were. And so I think probably a lot of people in Georgia 10 can understand and connect with being in such dire straits and having to face an economy that is not super helpful. From there, once 2016 happened and the election of President Trump, I went to work for Chalice Montgomery's congressional campaign, because I felt at that moment the most important thing was getting one of the two houses, either the Senate or the House, to flip, because he was such a threat to just democracy as a whole. And so I went to work for that campaign, and Chalice, and I believe you probably know Whitney was the campaign manager. They both were tremendous in allowing me the access and insight into what goes into a congressional campaign. I was able to travel around Georgia 10, and that's why I'm running for this seat now, is because I've seen what it takes to travel around the district and to actually truly represent the people of all the 25 counties in Georgia's 10th congressional district. And I believe Jody Heiss fundamentally does not do that. And so that's why I'm running, because I feel like I can bring character and compassion to this Georgia 10 congressional seat, which is what we need right now in this country the most.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing so much of like your very personal story of kind of how you got to be where you are right now.
Sure.
You kind of lead us into a good place to explore, which is talking about what makes up Georgia's 10th congressional district. Who all does that make up?
Absolutely. So Georgia 10 consists of 25 counties. There are 5 partial counties and then 20 entire counties. It stretches from the part of Athens has been gerrymandered. So part of it's in the 9th, part of it's in the 10th, and gerrymandering is a whole nother subject. But
why would Athens be so gerrymandered, Andrew?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know why. So that goes from Athens all the way down past Milledgeville into Jefferson County, Washington County to the south. We go into Gwinnett, which includes Auburn and Decula to the west. And then we go all the way to the coast, to the Atlantic Ocean with Columbia County. And so it's a very broad, diverse group of counties. And not everyone is the same level of, progressive that we find here in Athens or in Gwinnett. A lot of the district, democratically speaking, is a lot more moderate. And that's one of the things since October that we've traveled and we've wanted to make sure that we're representing everyone. So that includes Athens, that includes Gwinnett, that includes places like Morgan County, which are very progressive, but it also includes places like Baldwin County, Jefferson County, Washington County, Putnam County, that might be a little more moderate. And so we're trying to always hear from everyone and to make sure we're representing everyone.
That's great. I've along the lines of sort of these titles that we have, whether you fall under a category of Democrat or Republican, or whatever, right, left, and the way these things sort of, I think, get confused in a lot of ways, because it definitely matters more so what it is that you're proposing we do.
Yes.
And speaking to these people who might maybe consider themselves a little bit more conservative, or live in a more rural area where it tends to be more conservative generally, I think the things that you are proposing, I was reading through your platform, like under economy, you're proposing things like raising the wage act and protecting the right to organize. And these are things having to do with jobs, which it doesn't matter what party you feel affiliated with.
Correct.
Everybody can get on board with better jobs, right? Do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah. And especially with this COVID-19 crisis, it's not just better jobs, but the right to organize. And as we've seen with our service workers and our grocery store workers, do they have the right and the ability to organize and advocate for what they deserve? You and I talked a little bit offline about this House bill that is coming up for a vote today. And one of the great things, and there's mixed things in this bill, but one of the great things that's in this bill is hazard pay for our service workers and our grocery store workers. And it's an additional $13 an hour. Now, that's great, but it shouldn't take Congress having to act to do that. We should have unions that could say, look, this, whether it's a crisis or not, this is a situation where we're extremely valuable on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And in a state like Georgia, you don't have that right necessarily to unionize. We don't have strong unions in Georgia. And so I think the more we can have a federal legislation that says, no matter who you are, no matter where you work, you have the right to unionize and organize and leverage that value that you bring to society, that you bring to our economy, to get what you deserve. And that's just one of those things I fundamentally believe. And so that's one of the things that this crisis has highlighted, that all of these workers need to have that fundamental right to organize and unionize.
Yeah, that's something we talk a lot about with Athens for Everyone. We talk a lot about workers' right to organize and unions and leveraging your power. And one of the things I think would be really cool, actually, if you are fighting for such a bill, like to start a kind of conversation that doesn't exist very much, or it has been tamped down in a lot of ways. And you said you grew up in Gwinnett County, is that right?
In Gwinnett County, yes.
I did too. And I don't remember, I just learned more about unions and anything about labor organizing
here in Athens, right? Yeah.
Here in Athens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like you could not only be pushing for that ability, but also pushing for the education of it. Like people don't have that information.
They don't, and that's an excellent point. Going back to the original point of describing district wide. What is this district like? And taking that message, and it's been understandably harder since we've all been under quarantine or stay-at-home order. Because that's a message that's much better presented in person to people. Mm-hmm. But to your point, it's an excellent message to take to the rest of the district to help them, to help everyone understand that you provide a tremendous service to not just your employer, but to the community. And you deserve every right to be compensated for that service. And the only way most people are going to be able to fully maximize their worth is through a union. Because any one individual worker standing up and saying, well, I'm not going to do this or else, well, you're just going to get fired.
Right.
What happens, the power of numbers, is when you've got 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 people that says, we're walking out. if you're not going to do what's right for us.
Yeah.
And that's the power of organizing. That's the power of unions. And that's absolutely a message we can take throughout Georgia 10.
That's a great message. I love that. And I guess right along with that is the idea of the Raising the Wage Act. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and there's a lot of small business owners that are hesitant or a little bit afraid when you initially bring this up. But the initial House legislation was, we're going to take the federal minimum wage and we're going to boost it up in increments.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go to, I believe it was $9.25, $10.25, then $11.25, and then stop and take a moment and look at the economic impact. And if it wasn't hurting small businesses, which I do not believe it would hurt small businesses, then they would keep going all the way up to $15 an hour. If it was somehow hurting small businesses, they would say, all right, let's take a pause. Let's figure out why it's hurting small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And let's figure out a way to make sure we can still get to that $15 an hour threshold, because that's the minimum. You know, we probably all think that, you know, people deserve to be compensated more than that. But if you look legislatively at like what can actually be accomplished, I think $15 an hour is the first best place to start.
Right.
And so I think if you do it in increments, we can get there. You're not always going to get everything that you want in one bill. And that's why you have to go in incremental steps. But that's why I do support the House bill that says, let's take it in increments.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make sure, because a lot of small business owners look at that $15 an hour and they're like, I can't make that work. I've tried it. I've tried the numbers. Doesn't work for me. I'll go out of business.
Right.
And I don't know enough to say that that's accurate or that's not accurate, but I do know enough to know that I'm going to listen to the small business owners in Georgia 10.
Yeah.
And I think that's, as your representative, it's your job to do that. And so I think making sure their voice is heard too is the responsible thing to do, all the while pushing for, this is our goal, a minimum of $15 an hour.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Hopping back for a second to what you were describing before, the current bill that's on the House floor right now.
Sure.
The HEROES bill, you said?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
We did a Facebook Live last night.
Yeah.
I got super wonky, super nerdy.
Where can people find that if they want to watch you be super wonky?
If you want to go to GeorgiaCan'tWait.com, or actually Georgia Can't Wait on Facebook. Go there first. Okay. It'll be up on GeorgiaCan'tWait.com eventually, but right now on Facebook, Georgia Can't Wait.
Good. We get to watch and talk about this. Cool.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of good things. As I mentioned before, there's $1 trillion for state and local governments. Now you may ask, and I did a very not great job of explaining like why all these things are important, but if you're in the state of Georgia, especially if you're an educator, mm-hmm. The state of Georgia has said we're going to have a 14% budget cut. All right. My sister is an elementary school counselor. My brother is a social studies teacher at an alternative school in Gwinnett called Give. And so anytime you get, a 14% cut in education is massive, especially facing the prospect of a fall where we still might not be having in-person school. So you're taking a situation which under the current budgeting and the current funding was already very challenging, where everyone was trying to use Zoom to teach people. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to say, well, you're still going to use Zoom to teach people, but we're also cutting your budget by 14%, which means furlough days, which means less support staff. All across the board, it's a much worse situation for the children in the state of Georgia. Mm-hmm. But $1 trillion for the state and local governments is a good start. That's all it is. That doesn't cover near enough. As I mentioned before, there's an extra $13 in hazard pay for essential workers in healthcare, food retail, public safety, and transportation. Long overdue, should have been in the first bill in March.
Right.
But at least it's being proposed now. More money for enhanced unemployment benefits. The $600 extra that was going to people that was set to expire in July is now carried through to the end of the year.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that provides some certainty and helps alleviate a little bit of the stress and anxiety that goes with it. Conversely, some of the things that are not so great. It's one $1,200 check to people. Again, which I think anyone who has followed the news at all knows that this crisis is going to last months, if not into next year. And to sit there and say one more $1,200 check to people is good enough falls, again, far short of meeting the moment where we are in this country. I personally am an advocate for saying, at the very minimum, we need to make sure people have direct relief from the federal government of anywhere from the neighborhood of $1,500 to $2,000 for the duration of this crisis. Because you've got to eliminate the economic uncertainty that folks have right now. You've got to eliminate the stress, the anxiety, and you have to make sure that they're incentivized and that they and their family are taken care of so that they're not worried about, I need to rush back to work in unhealthy conditions.
Right.
I'm going to go to my job and put my health at risk and then come back home, put my wife or my husband or my children or my grandparents that might live with me. I'm going to go ahead and put all of them at risk in favor of the financial health of the economy. We need to take that off the board for people.
Right.
We need to make sure that they've got enough money coming in on a monthly basis and that they know that it's not, let me please pray that this bill passes.
Yeah.
That's the most frustrating part is that we can pass a bill right now that says we can take care of you for at least, whether it be the next 3 months, the next 6 months. We could do that. That's a choice that we're presently not making. So it's frustrating as a Democrat to see a democratically led bill that's not proposing that.
Right.
A couple more things, and I'll wrap up because I know you have a million more questions. No vote by mail initiative in this legislation, extremely frustrating because, again, you're going to make people choose between going to vote in person or I can vote from the safety of my own home during a pandemic, a public health crisis. What is the more responsible thing to do? You shouldn't make people make that choice. And then one more thing, the Paycheck Protection Program. One of the good things, I'll jump back 1 second, to the $1,200 is that they're making it for everyone in this country, including immigrants, which was not something that happened with that first bill. Now it's going to everyone in this country. So that's good. On the downside, the Paycheck Protection Program, which had numerous problems in terms of getting funding to small businesses in minority and rural communities because they did not have access to quote myself, the cool banks, basically. The banks that had the inside track, the banks that could, on that Saturday and Sunday before this thing launched, could spend all day prepping for it. Not everyone in Georgia 10 or across the country have banks that could do that. And so what you saw was 85 to 90% of minorities and people in rural communities not getting those small business loans. So one of the more disheartening things in this bill is that now they're opening up these paycheck protection loans to lobbyists in Washington.
Mm.
And it makes no sense whatsoever. It's completely unconscionable. And it's not something that just needs to be in this bill at all.
It's so strange. And you mentioned before, like this is Democrat led. Oh, they know Mitch McConnell's not going to vote for it. So what do you think the reason is behind like watering it down? Why not push for the best possible aid?
Part of it is we've talked about, and maybe we didn't talk about this online, but this bill also did not include remote voting. So right now in the House, Democrats have a very tightly controlled bill consolidation process. It's Nancy Pelosi and a few of her closest advisors. That's who's coming up with these bills. If you open it up to remote voting and have input from everyone, well, now you're going to get what the entire country needs, as opposed to what 4 or 5 people might think the country needs.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always going to get a better solution the more input you have. If I here in Georgia 10 was to talk to 4 or 5 people and then base all the legislation that I propose off those 4 or 5 people, would that legislation be better as opposed to if I traveled the 25 counties of Georgia 10 and talked to hundreds of people, if not thousands of people? I think the second legislative proposal would be much better.
Yeah.
And what we have right now is a very, tightly controlled process because we don't have remote voting. To answer your question, I think they're a little bit disconnected from what the average people are going through right now and the people that are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's the simplest explanation.
Okay. Deborah Gonzalez. Hey, Deborah. Thank you.
Hey, Deborah.
Is asking for a little clarification on what you mean by remote voting.
Great question. So right now, the only way the House of Representatives, because the Senate has continued to meet, they've had somehow no issue in convening all 50 of them, all 100 of them, sorry. But the House of Representatives, there's 435, and they've said, at times it's not in the best interest of everyone's public health to all meet at the same time. And so what they've had with the last bill, it was a Democratic sponsored bill that they had all the votes, so they didn't need all 435 members. Right now, this vote for this bill, there's on the Democratic side, there's a lot of frustration. So it's not clear that they have the votes to pass it. And so they need everyone to convene to see if they can pass it. What remote voting would do would be what we're asking all the essential workers in this country to do. Adjust, do what you need to do to keep operating. We've seen it with our grocery stores. They've got things up at the checkout, they've got masks, they've got gloves, they've adjusted. We've seen it with our restaurants. They're only doing curbside service, contactless trade-off. They put your food on a table, you pick it up. So what we're asking of all these businesses is adjust. If you're essential, adjust and still do your job because you're essential. What the United States Congress has chosen to do, they're very essential. They've chosen not to pass any kind of remote voting measure, which would allow them to debate bills, to still hold their committee conferences,
I see.
And be able to put forward legislation when clearly the American people need it. The excuse we've gotten, why has it been so long since the last bill?
Mhm.
And both Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi have said, we don't think it's responsible to meet until we have a bill finalized. Well, what that says is we're not going to have a bill finalized until these 5 or 6 people in the House, Democratic leadership, have agreed to something. Then we're going to call everyone together and you're going to basically be told, vote for this or else. And that's not a democratic process. So remote voting would allow people to engage and have input and have their voices heard and have them actually represent their districts. And so that's where we need to go. For the life of me, I don't know why it's not in this bill, other than, Nancy Pelosi and her leadership team wants to keep a very tight rein on what these bills look like, because the Democrats as a whole are very frustrated.
Yeah. We have from Carlos Whitaker asks, sorry, it got moved up. Do you support the Vote Safe Act?
I believe the Vote Safe Act is a vote by mail act. If that's not correct, Carlos, please correct me. But I believe that's what it is. And if that's the case, I do believe we need to move to a vote by mail system in advance of the November election. I don't know if Carlos has responded to that.
Not yet, but we'll
okay. But that's my understanding of that legislation. Because again, we don't need to be making people have to make a choice between their vote and their health, just like we don't need to be making people make the choice between their paycheck or their bank account and their health. It's a false choice that's getting pressed upon us by people that aren't looking out for us.
Right. Carlos clarifies, it does that and it ensures safety for in-person voting.
Yes. So anything that advances vote by mail is fantastic. I know a lot of the in-person voting, we've had trouble in various states, including here in Georgia, Wisconsin also, having poll workers, because poll workers tend to be older.
Right.
And those are probably the people we least want to be showing up and dealing with from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., hundreds and hundreds of people. And they have no idea how those people have been conducting themselves other than like the 30 minutes that they're there. I think that way about the grocery store workers. They're there working, they're trying to be protected, but they have no idea what I'm doing with my other 24 hours, if I'm being responsible about it or not. And I think that's an incredibly unfair position to put people in. But if there's a way to do in-person voting responsibly, I would be for that. But again, vote by mail should be the priority, and that should be what we're directing everything towards.
Right. And Deborah added, thank you, Deborah, again, that this was, yes, about vote by mail, and it's sponsored by Senator Kamala Harris.
There we go. I mean,
cool.
You're in good company when you're agreeing with Kamala Harris.
So okay, we've done a good amount of our talk so far on jobs, and I'm still going to ask about jobs. Leading us into that is talking about the Green New Deal. I, of course, excited about the potential for job creation there, but the idea of the Green New Deal does so much else. It addresses so many issues. Can you go into some of your thoughts on that, Andrew?
Absolutely. And Georgia 10 in particular is in a great position to take advantage of legislation like the Green New Deal. We are desperate for a sustainable economy in Georgia 10. If you travel Georgia 10, you see little pockets of industry here and there, but there is nothing central that holds the entire district together and provides consistent long-term employment like the Green New Deal can, like an infrastructure bill that doesn't just include green energy, but it includes rebuilding our schools, our roads, our bridges. And that's what I love about the Green New Deal, is that it's all encompassing and it puts people back to work in a way that is not just good for the environment, but it's good for our entire community. And I think that's one of the things that is great about the Green New Deal. And we still have to figure out, because you get the question of a federal jobs guarantee versus the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal kind of incorporates a federal jobs guarantee. What I would like to see in Green New Deal legislation is, if we're going to guarantee people jobs, let's do the work of providing the A to Z on how we're going to do that. We've seen that with Medicare for All, for instance. The work has been done for the most part in terms of a universal healthcare system. It's not just a slogan. Something like a federal jobs guarantee, anytime I ask an advocate of the federal jobs guarantee, give me the details, give me the A to Z of how we make that work. Inevitably, almost no one can ever come up with, all right, how do we make this work? Do we have, there's 435 congressional districts. Do we have 435 job hubs? Does someone wake up in the morning, call a number, or log on the internet and find out where to go that day? What do we do about the guarantee part of this job? When people, as we've seen come to light in the last 4 or 5 years, lots of men in particular behave very inappropriately in the workplace. What are we going to do with those people if it's a guaranteed job? If someone is sexually harassing someone, and at the same time we're saying it's a guaranteed job, a lot of the times the answer I get is, we just transfer them somewhere else. And to me, that's not a very responsible answer. That's not a responsible answer at all. We need to have an answer for, what does a federal jobs guarantee mean? And what happens when you behave inappropriately to the point where it's not safe for your coworkers to be around you? We need to figure out that part of a federal jobs guarantee. And that's probably the one hang up I have about the Green New Deal, which I do support. We just need to iron out that detail.
So looking for more details on what federal job guarantees really look like specifically.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. At some point, I'm hoping we're going to interview Richard Dean Winfield, and I know he's a big
He's running for Senate. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe he can give us a little bit more detailed thought on that, or his plans, because I know he's been touting that for a long time. So
absolutely, he ran in 2018 for this House seat on that, and
That's
I
right.
mean, he got a considerable amount of support. So
yeah, he has some really great ideas there. But I'm glad you went through the jobs guarantee, because that's kind of attached to my Green New Deal question usually. So along those same lines, though, I asked this also of, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. I just talked to him, Devin Pandy. I asked him.
District 9, he's great.
District 9, yeah, Devin's super cool.
He's awesome.
And he's got some wonderful ideas for his platform and what he wants to get done. So I asked him his thoughts about jobs guarantee versus universal basic income as well. And he kind of had an idea of more like in tandem, and using the UBI more as like a temporary thing, or maybe something we use right now because of the crisis. But do you have thoughts on universal basic income?
I mean, and I don't know exactly what he said, but I think there's probably two different answers. One is during this crisis. I absolutely don't want people to feel like they have to go to work during a public health crisis if it's going to put their health or their family's health at risk. So if we want to frame giving people $1,500 a month, $2,000 a month as UBI while we're in this crisis, I'm fine with that. Long term, I think I am more towards a federal jobs guarantee as opposed to UBI, because I do believe in the value of someone feeling like and actually contributing to their community. And I think a federal jobs guarantee, the way we talk about it is whether it's a Green New Deal in terms of building up green infrastructure, or it's building up our roads, our bridges, our schools, that is something that people can take immense pride in. And if we want to go just one step further and talk about people's mental health, what does more for someone's mental health than the notion that I contribute to my community, I make my community better? And I feel like a federal jobs guarantee does that much more than a universal basic income. Because a universal basic income, to my understanding, is open to anyone, and it doesn't necessarily matter what they're doing with their time. I feel very much it does matter what you're doing with your time. And if you can be contributing positively to society, that is so extremely valuable to us as a whole. And I think that's valuable to you as a person. And so that's why I would lean much more to the side of a federal jobs guarantee, because you're contributing to your community, you're making your community better. And that's, just how I see it, and just my experience in having jobs throughout my life. I feel much better when I'm a productive member of the community. And I don't know that the universal basic income gives that same emotional and psychological effect.
That's interesting. Let's pivot.
Let's pivot.
Let's pivot. Why don't we go into criminal justice reform?
All right.
Going right ahead and advocating, as AFRI always does, about ending cash bail.
Yes.
Do you have thoughts on measures like that, or what else could be done over or abolished if need be?
I mean, I'm absolutely for ending cash bail. I'm for ending capital punishment. I'm for ending for-profit prisons. As we've seen throughout the various segments of our economy, when you have people that have an incentive to, whether it's imprison people or it's to make people work for so little money, it's such great expense or such great profit for your company, I think that just does nothing but tear down our communities. And so I firmly believe we need to get rid of for-profit prisons first and foremost, because that will eliminate any incentive for any police officer anywhere, any sheriff anywhere, to have just in the back of their mind, even if it's not cautious. I never say that word correctly. Even if it's not something they're actually aware of. I think it can't help but feed into how they do their job. And if we have a system that is completely detached from a for-profit prison system, we can allow our officers the latitude to deal with each situation the way they see fit. And just in knowing people like John Q. Williams, who's running for sheriff, he has worked in the Athens-Clarke County community for years and years, both as a resource officer at our high schools and as a police officer in some of our public housing units. He knows that community better than anyone else. If he doesn't have someone over his shoulder saying, we have our numbers we need to reach, you need to do what you need to do to meet those numbers, I think our community overnight becomes a whole lot better, because now that allows someone like John Q to bring compassion and understanding into his job in a way that currently doesn't exist with our for-profit prison system. It's just, and we can get into how much it costs for them to make a phone call. We can get into how much their labor is worth and how virtually non-existent they get paid for that labor.
Right.
I think it's all part of the same conversation where no one anywhere should be making money off people that we imprison, period.
Yeah, agreed. That's pretty much our stance on that as well.
It seems like the very common sense stance, right?
Yeah.
This is not like we're not reinventing the wheel. This is the way it should be.
Right. And there's a thematic aspect to a lot of change and reform we want to see in our society, which is removing profit.
Yes.
So many systems.
Absolutely.
Including the criminal justice system.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to
and just one more note, since we had Deborah comment.
Sure.
Deborah has been such an advocate for all of this stuff. I would be remiss if I did not mention just how wonderful an advocate she is for this community here in Athens, and how egregious that election being stolen from her was.
Yeah.
That's just unconscionable. And for anyone watching this, look out for Deborah Gonzalez 2022. She's coming hard. We're going to get it done. We're going to have a DA that represents the people of Athens, Clarke County, and Oconee.
And hopefully more government officials that represent the people and won't take away their chance to vote for their DA.
Absolutely.
Right. Nice job there, Andrew. Thank you.
Deborah's just so fantastic. I mean, I know I gush over Deborah sometimes, but it doesn't matter what the situation is. She always is about, I'm going to be a resource for the community.
Yeah.
You know, and she wakes up every single morning asking herself, how can I be a resource for this community? And there's something just so admirable and so inspiring about that. And she's just here in Athens is one of the people that I've looked up to the most.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, hopefully I'd like to talk to Deborah too. I'm gonna contact you, Deborah. Hopefully we can.
She would absolutely come on. No doubt.
All right. So speaking of this very thing, actually, let's talk about elections and voting rights. Because we just saw our election get stolen from us, as Deborah just mentioned in the comments, that an election was stolen from over 150,000 people to vote for their district attorney by our governor.
Right. And so as a candidate, one of the questions I get asked a lot through various county parties or in this COVID-19 crisis, a lot of it has been through radio stations. So we've been connecting throughout the district with radio stations in Jefferson County, Washington County, Milledgeville. One of the very first questions we get asked is, what is the first piece of legislation you would propose? Mm-hmm. And even within our campaign team, we have a little bit of a debate, but my answer is always, we need a new Voting Rights Act. The House passed something back in 2018 and didn't get passed to the Senate, obviously. I think it was For the People was the actual title of the act. But it expanded voting rights. It got us back to Sunday voting. It limited the impact of gerrymandering and money in our elections. And so to me, if you're going to ask, and I know you didn't ask, but I answered the question sometimes I want to answer. That's, the candidate in me. To me, the very first piece of legislation that we need to pass as a Congress and that we need to get through as a Senate, once we flip the Senate, once we elect either Sarah Riggs Amico, John Ossoff, or Teresa Tomlinson and Reverend Warnock, and we flipped the Senate and got Mitch McConnell out of power, one of the first things we need to do is pass a new Voting Rights Act that makes Election Day a national holiday, that extends early voting, that eliminates any kind of process that prevents the people from having their vote counted. And so we've got to make sure that that's always my first answer. That would be my first legislative proposal, because if we don't shore up the foundation of our democracy right now, given what happened in 2016 with the foreign interference, it doesn't matter what we're for. If Republicans can circumvent and can suppress and can continue to be elected, whether that's the presidency or people in the Senate or people at the House of Representatives level or people at the local level, if we have a system where Republicans can circumvent all of the people's vote, it doesn't matter what we're for. It doesn't matter if we're for universal health care or a Green New Deal. It doesn't matter if we're for criminal justice reform. None of it's going to get passed. So first and foremost, we need to make sure we shore up our democracy and to make sure that we have a new Voting Rights Act that hopefully a President Biden can sign, that makes sure everyone's voice is heard, and that makes sure that we have a system in place in this country that acknowledges that everyone's right to vote is sacred to our democracy. And I don't know that anything else can be a number one priority, because without that, everything else is for naught. If they keep stealing elections like they did in 2018 with Governor Kemp against Stacey Abrams, if they keep canceling elections like they did in 2020 with Deborah Gonzalez, it's not going to matter what we're for. So that has to be the first priority, is to shore up our democracy and to make sure that the foundation of our democracy in this country is solid and stable, and that everyone can go to the polls knowing that their vote will be counted. Because nothing is worse for a democracy than for people to be like, the fix is in, it doesn't matter what I do. Because we already have a large section of the public that kind of feels that way.
Certainly.
And the more we go towards that, the less people we're going to have engaged in the process. So we need to make sure we do everything to get towards the other direction and to say, look, your vote does count. It does matter. Please vote, whether by absentee, early voting, on election day. We need you to vote because your vote matters. Your vote's going to be counted. These are still fair and free elections. And so I think that's number one, what we should be fighting for.
That's a good answer. That was practically a closing statement, which is the next thing I was going to ask for. I mean, would you like to give people a summation of who you are, why they should?
I would, but first I would like to ask you, Aaron,
Oh,
as a resident of Georgia's 10th Congressional District,
yes.
what do you think about any of these issues or all of these issues that we've talked about tonight?
I'm reversing the questions on the question asker. Well, let's see if I can go back through the things that we've talked about. I also wish that the Heroes Bill was stronger. I wish that Democrats would kind of gain more backbone about what to push for. I would hope, though, that we get to see people come to the polls and that their votes get to count, and that we actually flip a lot of houses and flip a lot of seats in the House and the Senate, and hopefully all over the place, so that we can have progressive ideas being put forth, things like a federal job guarantee. I would like to see the Green New Deal passed with flourish so that people can enthusiastically start to build infrastructure that not only addresses our environmental crisis, but also the economic and job crisis that we currently have, so that people can confidently know that with a jobs guarantee built in, that they can get a job. And in having that in our structure, in our infrastructure, that also creates the jobs of the people who have to deal with that, who do it. That's their job to do.
Right.
And I want to see us with a robust kind of job sector that does that sort of thing. Also having things like tuition free or public colleges, creating probably, I think it would be a great idea to have a bank through the mail, or in our post offices. Those are all things that I think would help ensure better lives for everybody. It would help. Oh, one thing we didn't get to talk about was taxing the rich, which is something I would also like to see us do, because there's just, it's so hard to even articulate in words. But there's a really wonderful article, actually, I'll attach it if somebody else doesn't in the comments.
Yeah.
A great article that I recently saw that did a visual representation of the wealth held by the wealthiest, some like the 1%, and what their wealth looks like in comparison to other wealthy people too.
Right.
The massive amount of inequality, and how even if we taxed those people at 70 or 80%, they would still be so wealthy.
They would, yeah, it's unbelievable. And to touch on that point, since in the last 6 weeks, Jeff Bezos, the Amazon.com president, has made $23 billion in new profits.
While so many people in our country are worried about where they're going to get food,
right,
if they get to pay their rent, this dude's well on his way. I think I saw a headline that said, like, he's well on his way to becoming the world's first trillionaire.
Right. And at the same time, he's not doing everything he needs to do for his employees.
Right.
You know, that are working in those distribution centers. And that's so frustrating.
The disconnect we have in our systems too about rewarding somebody for being a CEO versus the people who labor in order to give you that money.
Yes.
It's just astounding to me. And we're always, there's this strange argument about the thoughts behind rich people being job creators, and then the working class needing to work harder, obviously, in order to obtain that kind of wealth status, as just
It's just nonsense. We all know the working class works plenty hard enough.
Right, right.
You know, we do. We know that.
Deborah adds, if I'm assuming she says he, she means Jeff Bezos's text, at just 4%, he could pay for all student loan debt,
Right?
all of it, at 4%. That's just this kind of thing. We've got to get real about our wealth inequality.
And again, I know I gush over Deborah, but just like, this is how smart this woman is. This is why we need her as our DA come 2022.
Yes.
So anyone who is watching this, remember this come 2022. If you can volunteer for her, if you can donate to her, by all means do it. This is exactly the person we need in Athens and Oconee.
Well done. Well, now, so you got me on a rant. And, good job. Andrew, do you want to do a closing statement of any kind?
Sure, absolutely. So these are very trying times in our country. A lot of the hard work that goes into doing these candidate interviews often gets lost in the shuffle. So I want to thank Aaron. I want to thank Athens for Everyone for providing this tremendous community service. In the last few weeks, we have learned that the unemployment rate has reached the highest rate since the Great Depression. So not only are we in the midst of a public health crisis, we're in the midst of a financial crisis, but it did not have to be this way. The response to this crisis by the Trump administration was slow and half-hearted, and we've gone even one step beyond that. Now they're just disconnected. They're like, we're not even responding to this. They're leaving it all up to the states, which you get 50 different responses, which is not what the federal government is supposed to do. The federal government right now in times of crisis is supposed to lead.
Right. They're not leading at all.
They're not leading at all. Exactly, Aaron. Also, the response by our congressperson in Georgia 10 has been equally troublesome, if not downright negligent. He has been recommending people go back to work at the sake of their health. It's almost been a situation where it's like, not ask what I can do for my country, but what I can do for my stock market. And that to me is very damning in terms of the character and compassion of our current congressional representative. He doesn't care at all if you go to work and get sick and die or spread the coronavirus to your family. He's just concerned about the economics. I've traveled the 17 counties of Georgia's 10th Congressional District, and once the lockdown was in place, we've called the other 8 counties. The people of Georgia's 10th Congressional District are very kind, they're good, they're compassionate, they're hardworking. They deserve a representative who actually looks out for them, instead of putting them directly in harm's way by encouraging them to go back to work when it's unsafe. So my overall point is this: we have a public health crisis, we have an economic crisis, and along with the financial relief, the food drives, and the PPE for our medical personnel, democracy has to be part of the response. And we all get a chance on or before June 9th to do something about that. Because we're seeing in real time what happens when you have a crisis in this country and we have the wrong people in positions of leadership. Lives are lost, families are broken, and businesses that have worked their whole lives are gone in an instant. So democracy has to be part of the response. Compassion has to be part of the response. Electing people who truly represent the good, kind, hardworking people of Georgia's 10th Congressional District has to be part of the response. And I thank you, Aaron and Athens for everyone, for having me on today and giving me this forum and this access to connect with people.
We really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, Andrew. Do you want to tell people where to look up more information about you or contact you?
Absolutely. If you're on Facebook, if you want to go to georgiacan'twait.com, you can find not only all the events we have upcoming, virtual events, of course, but ways to get involved, whether that's writing postcards or donating. Everything is helpful at this point. We're in the home stretch of this thing. You can also go to georgiacan'twait.com. You can read about our entire platform. And if you are able to donate, we would very much appreciate it. Every $25 helps us reach 50 to 60 people by direct mail in Georgia's 10th Congressional District. And that's a tremendous gift that you would be giving us, because we still need to reach all these voters that have not voted by absentee mail, that are still voting in early voting, or that will vote on election day, June 9th. So every $25 helps us connect with so many people. So if you're financially able, we would really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. And just to add to that, I think early voting, at least here in Athens, starts on May 18th, which is next week.
It starts Monday. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. And one more quick plug. I will be doing the Athens Clark County. We don't know if it's a debate or if it's more of an interview like this was, but that's tomorrow at 6 p.m. So
what have they asked?
They have asked Tabitha.
Oh, Tabitha. Okay.
I'm not sure if she is committed to it or not. We've done several other things in several other counties, and she has not shown up. I'm hopeful, just for the people of Georgia 10, that she does show up, because they have every right to know what she thinks, what she believes, what she represents.
Absolutely.
So I hope I hope she shows up. But anyway, that's the ACC Dems, Athens Clark County Democrats, tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Please join us. If you didn't get your question answered tonight, submit your question tomorrow. I will be more than happy to answer it.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you again, Andrew. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Deborah, and everyone else for asking questions and making great commentary. And stay safe. Good luck, everybody.
Absolutely.
See ya.
All right.